Hello, everybody. So this is going to be our first lecture in linguistic anthropology. Congratulations on finishing the midterm. And yeah, we'll just move on from here. So as always, there's going to be a quiz and a reflection due. You know the drill. Just get them done by the Monday, and you'll be good to go. Just note that we will have, the final will be due. Let me check the dates. The final will be due the 5th. Yeah, the 5th. Okay. So, actually, that's kind of tight. I might adjust the final be due on the 6th, but I will have it available for y'all to do. Okay. Shoot. Yeah. Yeah, I have it has to be due the 5th though because it is summer session, so I have less flexibility. Yeah, I'll have it due on the 6th. But we will. Oh shoot, the timing really messed me up. Okay, it's all right. We'll get her done. Don't worry. Just keep up to date on Blackboard, and I'll let you know about the due dates. Okay. So, what can you tell about somebody by the way they speak? So hopefully after this lecture, you'll have a better understanding of like what language is, what linguistic anthropology is, but also like how can it apply to the way that people communicate, right? So when I ask this question in class, usually the biggest answer is like, oh, well, they're from somebody somewhere else, which is kind of true, right? Because if they speak English a certain way, you can automatically assume. But there's a lot of other things that you can tell about somebody just off the bat by the way they speak. Okay. All right. So what is language? Linguistics is the scientific study of language. Linguistics is not the same as linguistic anthropology, and just like a lot of the other fields, like, especially like archaeology or like bioanthropology, there are a lot of crossover classes, right? So, for example, if you're getting your graduate degree in linguistic anthropology, you're going to be taking linguistic classes, right? But the difference again is the focus of the research. Okay, linguistics is not the same as linguistic anthropology. Language is a system of arbitrary vocal sounds. We're going to go over that in the next slide. It enables humans to communicate with each other in ways not seen among other animals. This is very important. It is used to encode and communicate about human experiences of the world and one another, and is a key component of human symbolic creativity. Okay, so those last two are kind of important because if you think about a lot of the reasons why we communicate, right? Yes, there are more direct forms of communication, like help or like I'm hungry or whatever. But think about most of the stuff that we consume, right? Especially obviously in the past it was more books, but today books and magazines and newspapers. But today it's more about YouTube videos and Instagram and TikTok, stuff like that. We are consuming things that explain and kind of show, illuminate, put light on these people's experiences in the world, right? And that's very different from other forms of communication, right? So again, think about how much of your communication is actually communicating your experience and how much of your communication is actually quote unquote communicating like a direct piece of information, right? You might do it once in a while, but most of the time it is going to be about a human experience. And it's very hard for us to imagine because again, we've grown up our whole lives, communicating this way. But if you were to look at other animals, it is very difficult or impossible for them to communicate about an experience. They communicate things like danger, food and stuff, or like there's water here or whatever, right? They can communicate certain things like that, but it's very difficult for them to communicate about their experience, right? So if I read, I just watched a vlog on like some dude eating in Thailand, like he is communicating to me about his experience. He's not necessarily communicating to me specific types of information. Okay. And finally, language is a key component of human symbolic creativity. Now, the reason why this is important, it's related to human imagination that we went over in archaeology, because the way we communicate, right, the way we use language is creative. And when we say creative, I don't mean that it's necessarily that different from each other. Well, it is, but it's creative in the sense that, again, similar to human imagination, like we all communicate differently, right? And we not only communicate differently, but we receive the information differently. That is something that's very different in humans than is about other animals. All right, so these 6 things are extremely important. Okay, these are the 6 elements of human language, right? The 6 characteristics that make human language so special: openness, arbitrariness, duality of patterning, displacement, semanticity, and prevarication. Okay, these 6 attributes, these 6 characteristics, are what make human language different from other forms of communication. Some of the other animals will have some of these attributes, but never all 6. Okay, so human language: openness, the ability to understand the same thing from different points of view. This attribute of human language is productive, right? And you'll see later on that our non-human primate relatives, they do communicate, but their communication is quote unquote closed, right? So if I tell you about a steakhouse and how I love the service and the ambiance is really good, I had a great experience, and then your other friend was like, yeah, it was a nice place, but I hated it because the steak was bad, right? You can understand that one thing from different perspectives. Very special to human language. Arbitrariness. There's no link between particular linguistic sounds and means. The textbook has the example of boy. Obviously, in English, it means young man or adolescent man, and in another language, I think it was an African language, it said, it means something else, right? Arbitrariness, if you were to look at the word arbitrary, what it means is random, right? And what this is basically saying is that there is no biological link between the words we use and what there's no biological link between the words we use, period. Okay, so what does that mean? That means that everyone has a different word for, like, fire. Yeah, fire, right? And or everyone has a different word for, like, I don't know, lamb, right? So like these words, the sounds that they make are different across all humans, right? It's because language is cultural, and so we learn this communication method through culture, right? Again, I know this is much more complicated than it need to explain than it actually is, but arbitrariness is us using quote unquote random sounds to mean certain things. Okay. If you ask again, I'm not an expert on animals, but if you ask a dog to communicate that it's hungry, all dogs will communicate that way. Okay, unless they're taught differently, obviously, right? So arbitrariness is that there is no biological link between the words that we use or the sounds that we use and its meaning. Okay. Duality of patterning, the fact that the things that we say have sound and have meaning, like the fact that you're listening to this and understand what I'm saying, that's duality of patterning. Displacement, the ability to talk about absent or non-existent objects and past or future events as easily as we discuss our immediate situations. This is very important. Absent or non-existent objects. It would be great if there was a teleporter to take me from home to Kingsborough, right? I am literally talking about something that doesn't exist as if it is right in front of me, right? It would be amazing to get in a space shuttle and go to Mars, right? I would love to see the world from that perspective. I'm talking about something that is non-existent, but I could still talk about it as if I'm, in my chair right now, like looking at the computer screen. Okay. Past or future events, right? The steakhouse I went to last week was amazing. I can, it had a beautiful interior and the wait wasn't very long. That I'm excited to go to the steakhouse next week because I've been really craving steak, right? I am talking about things in the past or in the future as easily as I talk about things that are happening right now. That is displacement. Okay. Semanticity, the association of linguistic signals with aspects of the social, cultural, and physical world in which the speakers live. All right. So again, this is the effect of society on our language, right? So for example, I know because of the internet, things are a little less obvious, but like, I'm mad tight, right? That is something that is said and known in terms of its meaning in New York, right? Now it's known all over the place because of the internet, but let's just say, right, if you look up the words I'm space mad space tight, it does not mean I'm mad, right? But because you are in New York because the society influences the way that you speak or whatever, that is semanticity. The ability for society to affect the way you speak. Okay, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. There's a better example in the next lecture about semanticity with linguistic communities. Okay, prevarication, to make statements or ask questions that violate convention. Colorless green clouds sleep furiously, right? It doesn't, sorry, colorless green ideas sleep furiously. That is something that, it completely has no meaning, but our ability to like say those things, our ability to like even think about those things, right? The ability to break rules in language is prevarication. Now, these all are kind of hard to explain because we literally live our lives using these 6 things all the time without even thinking about them. So that's why they're kind of difficult to explain. But they, again, all of them in combination with each other make human language. Okay, animals or non-humans, when they communicate, they might have a few of these things, and it's not to say that they aren't intelligent or are intelligent or whatever, but these 6 characteristics will make human language specifically special. All right. So call systems are shared by humans and other primates. Human and non-human primate call systems are not equal to human language. Non-human primate call systems do not map onto elements of human symbolic language. Human call systems are controlled by a different part of the brain than language. So there are these, what I would consider them to be biological ways of communicating, and these are call systems, right? So things like laughing or crying or like, I don't know, like the noise you make when you're scared. These are all like, of course, what you think is funny, what you think is sad or whatever is going to change depending on your culture. But our ability to communicate that is a call system, right? And other primates have call systems, and they might seem like call systems because there's a, like a noise and a meaning associated with the noise, but that is not the same as language. As this slide is presenting, they are literally on different parts of the brain. Okay, so please make sure you have that clear. Call systems and language are not the same. Not the same at all. Okay. So, language and culture. Language is a biocultural phenomenon. The human brain and anatomy of the mouth and throat give the humans the capacity for language. Languages are cultural products embedded in meanings and behavioral patterns. Anthropologists recognize that the way people use language provides clues to how they understand their world and themselves. So even though this, because I'm biased, even though I am giving you a much more cultural side of language, or cultural examples in linguistic anthropology, it is actually also a biological phenomenon, right? So, if you want to study, if you get into like why we're able to speak or why we're able to learn language the way we do, when you start talking about the anatomy of our, whatever, our speaking muscles or organs or whatever, that is the biological side, okay? The cultural side of it is really that, one, we learn language through culture, but number two, it is very clear that you can learn about someone's perspective through the things that they say. Okay. Now, notice that this is different from an interview, though, because we're not necessarily strictly thinking about the things they say. It is that the things they say indicate something about their life, right? For example, if you're like, oh man, I love AC. That could probably mean that you're from, a place that's really hot, right? That is again, an indirect conclusion that I made through them saying I love AC. Now, does it really mean that they love AC? Who knows? But all I know is that it gave me an indication on their lives through the things they said. And that's what's the cultural side of why language is so important. Anthropological study of language reveals that symbolic language permits humans to communicate, but also sets up barriers. Cultural factors shape language use. There is no single best way for humans to communicate their experiences, and a common code within the larger speech community counters individual efforts to create a unique voice. So this is kind of a mishmash of important points. The first one, which again, just like human imagination and just like culture, right? Things do not develop on a straight line. Remember what I said about human imagination, and specifically with archaeology, what's important is that just because there are two groups of people that live near a river doesn't mean that they're going to be thinking or doing things the same way. That's what makes human imagination so important, right? So important and distinctive about humans. Now, it's the same thing with culture, right? Just because, for example, the justice, or the what's it called, the foster care policy, for Adam, with that foster care mother, like, not being able to call him, even though that policy was instituted to protect the kids. In Adam's particular case, right, it ended up hurting him. Okay, it ended up, making it so that he didn't have help from her when he could have had help from her. What I'm trying to say though is that there's no good or bad thing. It really depends on the situation, right? And it's the same thing with language, right? Even though language is made literally to communicate with other people, it also sets up barriers, right? If you were to go to another country, would you be able to understand what they're saying? Absolutely not. And why is that? It's because of language. Okay. Even though, again, the whole point of language is to communicate. Okay. Now, cultural factors shape language use. This is very important. Again, our surroundings influence the way we use language, right? A lot of the language we use, even though there are dictionaries, how many words have you actually learned from a dictionary? It's very little. It's usually you watching TV, watching YouTube, listening to your parents, talking to your friends, talking to your teachers. That is how you usually learn. That's how you learn. I mean, I'm assuming like 95% of your vocabulary, right? So cultural factors shape language use. There is no single best way for humans to communicate their experiences, and this is all to say that basically any human that is communicating any kind of way, there's no more developed, less developed, or better or worse way of communicating. And finally, this last point was from one of my first classes. A student asked me, like, oh, if language is completely cultural, like, why don't we just create our own languages? And it's because our culture regulates whether you're doing something right or wrong. So if you are a baby and you're being spoon fed, and it's apples, right? And as a baby you're like, oh, pear, pear. And then your mom or your dad will be like, no, 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 apple, right? That is our society, or in our case our family, influencing the our quote unquote unique voice, right? We are literally telling you that it is not the right way to say something. Okay, so that is why individual languages don't exist. It's because, again, the whole point of language is to communicate with other people. And in order to learn language, there are rules that are going to be enforced by whatever, your friends, your family, school, whatever. Okay, that's why individual languages don't come about. Anthropologists distinguish between language and languages. This is very important. Language is an abstract property belonging to humans as a whole, and languages are the specific ways groups of people communicate. Okay, so language, we're talking about language, we're talking about the thing with the 6 characteristics, right? We're talking about our ability to do these 6 things with, our language. Languages are specific things like, Spanish, English, Chinese, Japanese, patois, whatever, right? Those are languages. Okay. All modern human groups have fully developed languages. Languages are not simply an elaboration of call systems used by our ancestors. Languages use symbols that arbitrarily stand for something else. Learning a new language is challenging and is not simply a matter of learning new labels, but also must learn cultural context of words. We've already been over some of this, right? The first one, all modern human groups have fully developed languages. When we say modern, we mean Homo sapiens, basically, right? Now, a lot of people have criticized certain types of pidgin languages, like Creole and Patois and stuff like that, and saying that it is a less developed language. It is not. It is exactly as developed as other types of language, right? The only difference is that they are not as widely used as, whatever other language that is common today. Okay, but in terms of its complexity, they are just as complex. We already went over this. Language and call systems are completely different. Completely different, right? They are not the same. Languages use symbols that arbitrarily stand for something else. We talked about that. Now, this last one, though, is interesting. So when we think about learning a new language, we think about like Duolingo, right? We're like learning different words and stuff like that. But language is much deeper than that. In order to be fluent in a language, which again we're going to go over in the next lecture, you need to not only know what the words mean, but also when to use certain words, right? You guys don't even know it, but I guarantee you, when you go into a job interview, you're using different kinds of language than you would if you're talking to your friends. I guarantee you, when you're talking to your friends, you're definitely going to be using different types of language when you're buying food at a restaurant, right? So on and so forth, right? So when we talk about learning a new language, it's not just learning about the definitions, but also when it is appropriate to use that word. Communication. Human communication extends beyond unspoken and spoken language and includes the clothes that people wear, the length of time people keep others waiting for them, body gestures or kinesics, the acceptable distance between two or more people in a social setting. So this is just other kind of things that linguistic anthropologists pay attention to and are really focused on. Um, I am putting it here just so that you guys are familiar with it, because the way that I'm teaching it, it's basically like a part of culture anthropology. But there's a lot more linguistic anthropology than what I'm talking about, right? The clothes that people wear. How do clothes affect, your day-to-day life? When you're going to a job interview, you're going to dress a certain way. When you're going to teach PE, you're going to dress a certain way. When you're just going on your friend, you dress a certain way. You go to a nightclub, dress a certain way. When you see a blue uniform with a badge, it's a police officer. When you see, I don't know, when you see the yellow hat, you can assume that they're a construction worker, right? These are all important indications important ways of communicating, um, that aren't necessarily speaking related. Okay. Length of time people keep others waiting for them. That is pretty funny. As we know, there are certain cultures that value, people being early. There are certain cultures that value people being late. There are certain cultures that find it offensive when you're late. There are certain cultures that find it offensive when you're early. That's actually a pretty interesting topic. Body gestures or kinesics, right? There's a lot of people that talk with their hands. What do the hands mean? Is it interpreted as sometimes like, oh, this person's very passionate, this person is very motivated, whatever, right? These are important things. Like, what are the body gestures? Number one, and number two, what do they mean in that culture, right? Because if you are used to communicating, for example, with your hands, and in your culture, and your culture just thinks of it as a normal way of communicating, you might communicate that way in a presentation, and it might seem like you're very passionate, even though you're just kind of, if for you, it's just you're just using your hands normally. Okay. The acceptable distance between two or more people in a social setting is very interesting. If you guys have ever seen those memes where it's like leave room for Jesus, that is an example of proxemics, right? If your arms are completely stretched out and you're dancing with somebody, that is acceptable. However, if you're closer than that, then that is not acceptable. That is a great example of studying proxemics. Human communication is multidimensional and can be examined using semiotics, the study of meaningful signs and their use. This is not that important. Signs are defined by their function, icon, index, and symbol. Okay, so think of like a vacuum sign, right? So if you went to a blank room or a blank door and it had the picture of a toilet in front of it, that would be an icon. You know the toilet is literally right behind the door. Index points to is beside or is casually linked to that which it signifies. So if someone, I don't know, if you're walking to a building and there's an arrow in a toilet, going to the left, then you know that the toilet or the bathroom is to the left. And finally, symbol, which is completely disconnected from the toilet, is if there's a sign in the front that says like, oh, the bathroom is two doors to your left. Those three are, just important signs and that are part of communication. So, there's missing. There's a couple things missing. Let me pull it up. Oh, sorry. But yeah, so this is all kind of like a kind of a crash course on what is linguistic anthropology and what they look at. Hold on, sorry, I just messed that up big time. Where's my stuff? Oh, never mind, I found it. Sorry. Let me get this back into our presentation, and we will be good to go. Boom. All right, here we go. Oh, nope. Is that it? Yeah, okay. All right, so the next thing, speech represents spoken language, but language can be communicated in unspoken ways, including writing, Morse code, American Sign Language, right? Think about the ways you communicate day to day. Actually, a lot of it, I'm sure, is talking, but a lot of it also isn't talking. You're writing emails, you're shooting text messages, you're, doing whatever, right? Or sending Snapchat. I don't know if that's even that popular anymore, but whatever, right? Sending memes, okay? Human communication is the transfer of information from one person to another. So any form of communication can be studied by linguistic anthropology. All right, so this is kind of interesting, right? Communication. So there are these things called speech communities, and I'm going to go over this. It's going to sound complicated. I'm going to give you some examples. You're going to completely understand what this is. Speech communities are languages associated with discrete groups of people. Speech communities can be seen as communities of practice, an aggregate of people who come together around mutual engagement in an endeavor. Ways of doing things, ways of talking, beliefs, values, power relations, in short, practices emerge in the course of this mutual endeavor. So, what is this actually talking about? Speech communities, basically, an aggregate of people who come together around a mutual engagement or in an endeavor, are people that do things together. That's all it is, right? And the best example of this is when you have a job. When you have a job, you are going to have certain types of language that cannot be applied outside of that job, right? So I kind of think of it as like a sub language. So, for example, if any of you have watched Hell's Kitchen with Gordon Ramsay, they use a lot of cooking terms that would not, even though it's English, again, even though it is English, obviously, but it is being used in a way that is completely different than if you use it outside, right? So I think they said like have a four top. A four top, I think, is a table of four people, right? Or when they yell, when they have like a hot pan behind somebody and they say and they yell behind so everyone doesn't move, behind them, right? Those are words that have meaning, but because they're used in the context of Hell's Kitchen or in a restaurant, they have different types of meaning, right? When you are in the military, right, the Alpha, Bravo, Charlie thing, like the ABC, like those are, sorry, Alpha, Bravo, Charlie have their own meanings, but that's not what they're talking about. They're trying to communicate over the radio so that it's A, B, C, D, E, F, G without any confusion, right? Um, Police officers when they yell into the radio, 410 or whatever. Yes, 410 is English, but what does that actually mean in police speak? I think it just means like I'm over or whatever. Those are things that are part of speech communities, right? You are developing a certain type of sub language depending on what you're doing, and this happens all over the place. It's not just jobs. When you play video games, for those of you that play like online video games, there's a lot of language that you use that is very different from day-to-day language. I used to play Counter-Strike, like rushing B. What the heck is that going to mean outside of that video game, right? There's a lot of words like that. Okay, now the example that I think is going to be very funny is, you guys ever seen that meme where the dude is a blood and he is going through McDonald's and he says like, can I have a Boca-Bola and a Chocolate Dip cookie, right? And the idea is that because he is part of the Bloods gang, he cannot use the letter C or the sound C. And so he has to change the way he speaks based off of his gang affiliation. That is a great example of a speech community because they're engaging in a mutual endeavor, which is being part of a gang. And because of that endeavor, they are speaking differently. Okay, so those are speech communities. Okay, so I hope that was really clear. I think that was pretty clear. Okay, speech communities are basically different types of languages that are different types of sub languages that are developed to do stuff together, right? Whether it's a job, whether it's a video game, whether you're in a gang, those are speech communities. Okay. Now, again, what's very interesting about them is that they are not a different language, right? They're still English. It's still whatever language it is. But the difference on the bottom part of the slide here is due to context and frequency of occurrence, right? When you yell two top, right? I might yell two and top in some other context, right? But in the context of Hell's Kitchen, it means that there are two people at the table and they need to be served or whatever, right? Frequency of occurrence, how often does it happen? I guarantee you those people are yelling four top, two top, six top, whatever, like throughout the whole night. I will never be saying that many, whatever number top in my whole in like a week or a month. Does that make sense? So those two are what constitute a difference in the sublanguage, right? Is how often you use it, frequency of occurrence, but also in what situation you use it, which is context. All right. This is not that important. Patterning language involves morphemes, syntax, semantics, and pragmatics. Morphemes are the units of meaning. Syntax is sentence structure. Semantics is meaning, and pragmatics is the use of language. Human languages exhibit patterns at multiple levels, while non-human call systems do not. So this last point is more important. Multiple levels. What does that mean? That means that we can communicate differently depending on the situation. Just like the examples I gave you earlier, you are going to communicate differently with your friends than you do at work. You're going to communicate differently with your boss than you do with your coworker. You communicate differently with a police officer than you do with your professor. These are the different levels that human language can develop patterns on. Again, very different from non-human forms of communication. All right, full circle. What can you tell us about the way they speak? So the most obvious thing is, do they speak English fluently? And if not, they're probably from somewhere else. But also, you can tell a lot of other things. Are they in a rush? Do they need help? Are they dangerous? Are they happy? Are they sad? These are all parts of the things that you can tell by the way that someone speaks. How old are they? If they say like, what's that new thing I saw online, skibbity toilet riz or whatever, you can probably assume that they're a younger generation. If someone says the word, it's an old word, doesn't matter. Anyways, you get the point, right? You can tell a lot about somebody by the way they speak. Whether you do it intentionally or not is another case, right? And that's kind of what makes linguistic anthropology so interesting. Linguistic anthropology is really not just about the language itself, even though they take a lot of language classes, right? It's more about how does that language play into lives or people's lives, and what can that tell us about being human? Okay. Hope you guys found that interesting. We're really close to the end of the semester, and as always, if you have any questions, just shoot me an email at raymond.fong@kvcc.cuny.edu.